Boker Tov, Tzom Kol, and Gemar Chatima Tova to each and every one of you as we gather this morning for our Yom Kippur service. Looking out into the sanctuary, I said this at Rosh Hashanah, but now it's true again today. This is the most people that we've had in the building since March, and it feels good to see 60 of us all in a room together. In any case, over the Rosh Hashanah holiday, I spoke with you several times, in fact, about how a simple change in our behavior can radically change and improve our lives. In case you weren't in attendance, the miraculously transformative act was making a commitment to not complaining as part of a program called the 21-Day Complaint-Free Challenge. Each time you complain, engage in negative gossip, or use sarcasm, which is actually often a form of complaint in a mocking way, you are supposed to move your bracelet from one wrist to the other. It is amazing, but in a short period of time, you become acutely aware of the words that you use, which words are negative or positive, the energy you are putting out into the universe with your tone of voice, and how much better you feel when using more positive language. After a slip-up, approximately 4 hours after services on second day Rosh Hashanah, I am now once again proudly on day 8 of this challenge. One small change can, in fact, dramatically change or reshape the trajectory of our lives. Change can be transformative in positive ways. It can also be disruptive. Even with the No Complaint Challenge, it is disruptive, finding a new way to communicate with family and friends. If such a small change can have a big impact, larger changes in our individual or communal lives can and do have an exponentially greater impact. And we, clearly by the setup in this room, are living through a period of tremendous change. Recently, I listened to a shiur, or a lesson, by Dr. Alana Stein-Hain of the Shalom Hartman Institute, in which she shared a midrash from the Jerusalem Talmud, or Yerushalmi, about King David. A midrash, as you probably already know, is an explanation of a biblical verse. And in this instance, the purpose of the midrash is to explain why King David wrote 15 psalms, each beginning with the exact same words, Shir HaMa'alot, a song of ascents. The Midrash not only provides an answer to this question, it provides guidance in how we go about making big changes in our lives, in our communities, and in our communal behaviors. In order to understand the Midrash, we have to recall a bit from King David's life. David, from his youth, was deeply devoted to God. Early in his reign, he brought the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh to Jerusalem, and then he built a palace in Jerusalem. He also really wanted to build the temple in Jerusalem. However, God told David through the prophet Nathan that it would be his son Solomon and not him who would in fact build the temple. However, David was a king, and kings like to do what they want to do. And so, though he knew that he was not supposed to build the temple itself, he set out to at least have a part in it, and he went to dig the foundation of the temple. Wanting to make sure that it was deeply embedded in the earth, he began to dig, hoping to reach the mythical abyss that the Torah refers to repeatedly, thinking that that is where he should build the foundation of the temple. After digging an incredible distance, according to the Midrash, of 1,500 cubits, which is 4/10 of a mile, the Midrash says that David came upon a ceramic pot. He's in the middle, you got to visualize it. He's surrounded by nothing but dirt, and all of a sudden, there's nothing but a ceramic pot. He looks around trying to figure out how the pot got there. He can't come up with an answer, and he goes to pick the pot up. As he's about to pick the pot up, the pot speaks and says, "Do not move me." Unbothered by the fact that a pot is talking to him, David says, "Why not?" The pot responds that it had been put there specifically to subdue the abyss that David had been digging down toward, and that if David were to move the pot, the abyss would come up through the hole and overtake the world. David listened, kind of, and said, "Okay, how long have you been watching this spot?" The pot said, "Since the moment that God spoke at Mount Sinai." David said, "Okay, but I'm the king." And so instead he lifted the pot from its place. Immediately the water of the abyss began to rise up, threatening to flood not only David and his big hole, but the entirety of the world. All the while that this is taking place, standing with David was Ahitophel, who was Bathsheba's grandfather and one of David's closest advisors. When Ahitophel saw the crisis that was shaping up before his eyes, the Talmud relates that he said quietly to himself, "If I stand by and do nothing, David will choke on the water and die, and I can rule in his place." Now, though Ahitophel thought he was speaking quietly, David was blessed with very good hearing, and he heard Ahitophel say this to himself, to which he responded, "If a wise person sees a crisis and knows how to stop it, but doesn't act to stop it, that person deserves to die by choking." David then quickly moved and put the pot back in place. After replacing the pot, he began to sing Shir HaMa'alot, a song of ascents. He recited a separate song for each 100 cubits that the water had arisen and needed to go back down. Thus, the Talmud explains through the Midrash, we have 15 psalms that begin with the words Shir HaMa'alot. And then the story ends by reminding us that years later, Ahitophel, who during this crisis had wished that David would die by choking, ended up dying by asphyxiation himself. It is an incredible story and one that I had not heard before, because most of the Talmud study that I have done in my life is from the Babylonian Talmud and not the Jerusalem Talmud. The Babylonian one is the one that more people are familiar with. And so I was very excited to hear this Midrash. And it has many, many things to teach us about the process of change and other aspects of our life. While change is a constant in our life, sometimes change comes suddenly. One action changes everything. At times we choose change, and sometimes it is thrust upon us by outside forces, and then we either adapt in order to survive, or we don't survive. Yet, even when we are forced to change, how much we allow ourselves intrinsically to be changed, the ways we go about those changes, and many other things are of paramount importance. Through careful analysis of this story, I believe we can gain some insights. So let's start. David wanted to do something he felt was really important and really meaningful. He knew that he couldn't just make a change randomly. After all, God had been specific through the prophet. He couldn't build the temple, but he still wanted to start the process. And so he thought about it, and he believed that he could do it right if he just dug down to the roots in order to place the foundation of the new thing on top of those roots. This makes sense. But even though he knew he had to be careful of not messing around with the actual roots, In his desire to do something wonderful, according to the Midrash, he did in the end, when he was told not to do it, still fiddled around with the roots of the thing literally and nearly destroyed the world. This is a reminder to us of a couple of things. The first is that just because we want to do something, just because we think we have a brilliant idea about how we can change our world for the better, we better not mess with the roots. In addition, there's something a little bit more basic. If you are blessed to have a prophet come and speak to you and tell you that God personally doesn't want you to do something, maybe you ought to listen. Now, you and I don't have prophets who are going to come and speak to us, but we do have our common sense and our knowledge of Torah. So what else can we learn? As a result of COVID-19 and the lockdown, there have been huge changes in society. Social distancing, masks, distance and asynchronous learning, mass telework, a switch from shopping and eating in restaurants to deliveries of all kinds and more. At our shul and most other non-Orthodox synagogues, rabbis and ritual committees have made changes to religious practices that hadn't changed in decades or centuries, balancing the needs of tradition with the spiritual needs of our congregants. Included in these changes is the introduction of Zoom services and streaming. This has benefited many people who otherwise would not be able to participate in services. Undoubtedly, some of these changes are here to stay, and much of this is good. However, as we move forward cautiously, acting with good intention, we must remember that we can never predict the consequences of every change that we make. We must learn from David's actions in this story, careful that when we dig down to find the essence of what we wish to achieve, we do not accidentally remove something that holds the entire foundation together. Analyzing the Midrash a little more, the pivotal moment is when David heard the pot speak, but didn't listen to its words. He was a king, and he saw himself as the obvious superior to the pot, even in a subject he knew nothing about. By assuming that he knew more than he did, and refusing to heed the words of one who he saw as inferior, even though that one only had one singular job, and that was guarding the abyss, David risked destruction for himself and others. From this, we are reminded to have a sense of humility. Nobody is an expert in every single subject. Even somebody who knows a lot about a lot of things doesn't know everything about everything. We must acknowledge our own limits, remembering our own imperfections and how our own egos occasionally blind us. We must take care to pay attention to who we really listen to, whose advice we take to heart, and whose words and wisdom, like David, we dismiss at our own peril. Now, David, like all of us, had some deep flaws, yet he possessed one quality that bears particular relevance for Yom Kippur. When David discovered that his arrogance in ignoring the pot had caused a crisis, he swiftly acknowledged his error. Within a few moments, he recognized the mistake, returned the pot back to its place, and did what he could to restore the balance of the world. Indeed, David's ability to admit when he made mistakes was one which we see repeatedly in the Tanakh. We also must be able to recognize when we have made mistakes, to acknowledge them, and then to be like David and act quickly to rectify them. While not all of our mistakes can literally destroy the world, thank God, they can and do destroy relationships, businesses, communities, and more. Moreover, the Midrash reminds us that since we are all human, when we do make changes, try something new, when we make even good-intentioned changes, there will be times when we get it right, and there will be other times when we will be making a mistake. However, while we must act with caution, we also should not allow ourselves to become completely unwilling to try something new for fear of ever making a mistake. Sometimes, in fact, fixing a mistake can bring about great beauty. David did not just put the pot back and hope that the water would recede again. He decided that he was going to fix his mistake, and he did that by taming the abyss through the creation of those 15 psalms. David's mistake, while terrifying for a few moments, led to words of inspiration that we still sing on a regular basis millennia later. Our mistakes, too, individual and communal, if rectified properly, can also lead to unexpectedly beautiful outcomes as well. That is the essence of what we are trying to achieve through our Yom Kippur prayers. There is a teaching that if you make a mistake, if you sin, and then you repent, you actually end up closer to God than you would have if you had never made the mistake to begin with. And now we reach the point of the story when we get to Achitophel and his response to the crisis. His behavior warns us that in the midst of a crisis, there are always those who are going to act to intercede on behalf of not only themselves, but others. But there are also always those whose first instinct is to see how the crisis can help them get ahead. When my sons were younger, they watched Spider-Man cartoons repeatedly. There was one episode in which the entire world is on the brink of destruction. During this crisis, Kingpin, who is a major nemesis of Spider-Man, decides that rather than work against Spider-Man, for the moment he had better give up his hatred of Spider-Man and work together to save the world. After they save the world together, he reasons that then they can go right back to being enemies. When somebody asks Kingpin, "Why are you helping Spider-Man? He's your greatest enemy," he says, "There is no profit in the destruction of the world." That should be a given. When there is a crisis, nobody should use it as an excuse to take power for themselves at the expense of others. Kingpin knew it. In our story from the Talmud, David knew it, but Achitophel did not. As we navigate life during a time in which change is all around and new crises emerge on a regular basis, we must be careful that those who are leading us are trying to truly help us rather than engaging in self-aggrandizement, gaining power for themselves. Moreover, we must be sure that we ourselves are behaving in ways to help others during a crisis and not only looking out for ourselves. Now, earlier, I spoke about how King David didn't listen to the pot because of his own ego, believing himself wiser than the pot. Regarding Achitophel, there is the opposite problem. Achitophel had a beautiful title. He was not only advisor to the king, he was David's grandfather-in-law. King David trusted Achitophel. That is why David allowed him to accompany him as he set about constructing the temple's foundation. Yet, Achitophel never had King David's interest at heart. He was bearing a grudge against King David for sorrows that he had caused Bathsheba years before. Luckily for David, he became aware of Achitophel's machinations. From this, we learn that as we navigate through our own moments of crisis in life, and we all will have them, we must take care that the people that we ask to stand by us are truly our friends and actually want what is best for us and not themselves. And finally, there's the last sentence in the story. There we learn that while Achitophel wished for David to die a gruesome death, in the end his own words come back to haunt him. A Jewish story of basically karma. We are living in a volatile time. People think, say, and write vile things about people they disagree with or dislike for any number of reasons. When they do so, they are putting truly negative energy into the universe. Our story warns us that the next time that we are tempted to truly wish something ill on somebody that we dislike, we would do well to recall Achitophel's wish for David, redounding back on himself. There are so many lessons in this midrash. As you think about the story when you leave today, I have no doubt that you will think of more. I pray that we each heed its many moral lessons. May we realize that just because we want to do something, that doesn't mean we should necessarily do it. May we, however, when necessary, cautiously embrace change, being careful not to uproot things. Listen carefully to who is speaking to us and what they are saying. Work for the benefit of everyone around us. Admit our fallibility and repair the mistakes that we make in the best, most beautiful ways possible. Refrain from wishing ill upon others. And strive in all that we do to serve God and bring God's light and love into the world for ourselves and all of humanity. Amen.